The best example is when we look at pests, like how we define pests and how we approach pests. And in the syntropic farming world, we see them not as pests, but they become agents of the department of optimization. This is how we call them. And so we are like reframing the role that they have. It's not like they come because they want to fight us and so we need to fight them, but it's more they're there for a reason and for us to work with them together. We observe and we learn from that.
Hello everyone, my name is Evelyn Zuniga and you are listening to Agroecology Bites, the podcast where we take big ideas about food and farming and break them down into small and easy to digest conversations. This podcast is brought to you by the Agroecology Partnership Project funded by the European Commission. When we think about farming, many of us imagine large fields of growing just one crop. But what if farms look more like forests, full of different plants growing together, regenerating the soil, and supporting biodiversity at the same time? Today on Agroecology Bites, we are exploring a fascinating approach called Syntropic Agriculture. What it is, how does it work, and could it help change the future of farming? Let's find out. Syntropic agriculture is an approach to farming inspired by how natural ecosystems grow and regenerate. Instead of planting one crop at a time, farmer grows many plants together. It can be from vegetable to trees to rebuild soil and support biodiversity. To help us understand more, we have the fortune to have Lilly Smidtlein today. And Lilly, thank you very much for being here. How would you explain syntropic agriculture in your own words to someone who is hearing about this for the first time? And just to have a more clear image in our heads, how does a syntropic farm looks like compared to a conventional farm?
For me, syntropic farming is a way of farming that is inspired by and alongside natural process, and it works with natural processes. And it's really important to think that it's both on the field and in the mind and in the soul. So that means, syntropic is not like a set of principles or like recipes, designs that we can buy, purchase, and then we have the solution. But it's more a perspective change and a paradigm shift. So for me, the biggest thing with syntropic agroforestry and farming is that it gives us the opportunity to do a lot of unlearning, what I say. So first of all, we need to forget everything that we learned, and then we need to learn again. So we need to look outside and observe how nature is creating fertility and how in the natural organism beings are working together and then imitate these processes. So we forget about domination over others. We forget about competition, all of these like human-made concepts. And then, we learn again, how can we actually cooperate? So actually for me, both in farming and also in the mental mindset, it has a lot to do with stop doing destructive behavior. So stop depleting soil, stop, all these destructive mechanisms. For me, the best example is when we look at pests, for example, like how we define pests and how we approach pests. And in the syntropic farming world, we see them not as pests, but they become agents of the department of optimization. This is how we call them. And so we are like reframing the role that they have. It's not like they come because they want to fight us and so we need to fight them, but it's more they are there for a reason and for us to work with them together. We observe and we learn from that. So because of this, we reframe the way how we see actors in the processes, but also us as farmers. So we are more like creators of resources. And so for the farming, I would say that syntropic agroforestry is a way of, like I said already, with natural processes, working with them. So this is mainly with succession and stratification. So we understand that plants have different needs and roles to fulfill. So this means according to their life cycle and also their needs of lights. And so basically when we look at a syntropic farm, it's basically a very, very, very diverse farm, super dense, very densely planted trees and also annual plants, because what is our number one goal is to build soil through photosynthesis. So we want to maximize photosynthesis through organizing the plants in the place in a very smart way, let's say, how nature also does it. And we're trying to mimic this. And yeah, last but not least, I want to say that the one thing that we have in Syntropics is also we work a lot with dynamics. So people who come to our farm regularly, like every couple of months, they always say, wow, your farm never looks the same. Like every time we come, it looks very different because as we are working with succession and we are also, as farmers, the driver of succession, the place always changes.
All right, that's a very clear explanation, and in my head I can see kind of how it changes. And I like the part where you said that the insects or the pests are the agents of the department of optimization. I really like that concept. Okay, so I guess we understand a little bit better how does it work now. With this in mind, so take us through your journey. How did you discover syntropic farming, and how did you realize that it was something that you wanted to explore here in Europe?
Yeah, of course, it's a long journey. I try to make it short. So, I grew up on a 5 hectare farm here in the south of Germany, my family's farm. My grandparents were primarily farming raspberries and asparagus, but also loads of, like, let's say the standard things, some cows, some pigs, some chicken, and so on, and potatoes and grains and so on. And then over the years, it became not as profitable anymore. So business went down and down, I would say. And then in 2018, me and a family friend, Cody, we decided to take over the farm and run it as a community farm with permaculture principles. And for us, the question was always, how can we feed us and other people in a regenerative way? Because we really saw and we heard from the stories of my grandma that the fertility decreased a lot over the decades. And yeah, so the big question was, how can we do this in a way that we're actually building resources while feeding us? And yeah, so while doing that, we first tried different permaculture methods and also other like agroecology principles. And then, yeah, we were stuck in the end with still some unanswered questions, primarily like, first of all, how can we create all this biomass? Because let's say for 1 hectare of vegetable farming with mulch vegetables, we need like 3 hectares of mulch. Where does all of this material come from without like depleting the place where we get it from? And how do we then transport it in a sustainable way? And yeah, how can we ensure water supply, especially in times of falling ground levels? So this was also a question for us. Like we see that water decreases and decreases every year. So how can we ensure that we have water at the place? And the third thing that really had to do with what I said in the beginning with the optimizers. Like we saw that plants were struggling. We had fungi on our plants. We had some insects eating certain areas, which is very normal. But we were like, yeah, how can we work with them and how can we understand why they are there? And how can we really improve the conditions for our plants? And then, yeah, these questions were left unanswered, I have to say. And then I found an ad for a workshop with Felipe Amato on syntropic farming here in Germany back in 2021. So I met Felipe, and then everything made sense, I have to say. Like all my questions were answered, both on a philosophical level, but also on a really practical level. Like, how can we do this? What are the strategies? And so together with Felipe, then we founded the Terra Network, which is a network to foster transition for ecological reintegration and reskilling in agriculture. So we are, yeah, both active in like education and training, but also in research and also in setting up networks that help promote syntropic practices. Yeah, so that's it in short, let's say.
So we know that the idea of syntropic farming was initially developed in Brazil, which is all the way across the pond. And Brazil is a country which with environmental conditions significantly different to what we have here in Europe. So here, for example, we don't have 12 months of sun like they do. And in this context, Lily, what is the biggest challenge in adapting those farming principles that came from a tropical country to climate conditions like the ones we have here in Europe, where we have growing seasons shorter and, for example, we experience frost?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we get asked that question a lot. To be honest, for me personally, it's not really a question I ever asked myself because, I mean, it is true that the syntropic principles that we know were developed by Ernst in tropical conditions. But it was his observations and also like tapping into the indigenous wisdom over there that, to be honest, for me, have nothing to do so much with like the conditions of the place, but more like how we as humans observe and see and interact with the place. So yeah, so I have to say, I personally was never tempted to apply these kind of recipes just because I don't think that syntropic farming is recipes. It's more like, um, yeah, a different way of approaching farming, a different way of approaching engaging with the natural world, let's say. Um, but if I want to ask myself the question, what are the challenges of implementing it here? I think definitely a big challenge that we have here in Europe compared to the Americas, for example, is that here we really have wiped out a lot of the indigenous knowledge. I mean, of course, in the Americas too, but here I think it's even more crass. Um, in that sense that there's so much knowledge that is lost, and not just about the knowledge in the sense of facts, but also in the sense of behavior and traits and customs of like how to actually engage with the natural world. And I think here in Europe, we are so far down the path of modernity, capitalism, patriarchy, and so on, that we need to unlearn a lot before we can really relearn. So there are so many structural concepts and really entrenched beliefs that I see both in myself and with everyone around that we are struggling so much to let go and to pass through, like also in the syntropic community or in agroecology, I see not just, of course, but everywhere, to be honest, I see that so many struggles are there with the ego and with all this competitiveness and this hyper individualism. So, yeah, I think this is what is the biggest challenge, not so much like the frost and so on, but really like the human side so that we can open ourselves even up to this kind of farming. Yeah, and regarding the question of frost and so on, I think it's really a bit of a ecological misconception to say that here in Europe it doesn't we don't have so much growth because I think even though we have, yes, we do have frost and we have also very cold times in winter, but our growing cycles are also quite intense, like for example, if we compare it to Portugal, where many people are like, oh, Portugal's so nice, so sunny and so on, but the grass, for example, grows way longer here in Germany, for instance, as down south in Portugal, just because of the intense heat. So I think heat is not always favorable for, in that sense, photosynthesis. And yeah, I think one thing is that humans always see that the grass is greener on the other side, so we're always like, over there it's easier and nicer. And but actually, in the essence, syntropic farming is about creating fertility the way how natural processes do. And this we can do anywhere. So we can also do it here by really asking ourselves the questions that, like, how are these processes creating fertility? And following these questions, this allows us to become more intimate with the place, with the species, with the cycles and the conditions of the place. And so, yeah, I just see like many opportunities, to be honest, because there's still so much to discover, like to re-indigenize us in here, let's say in our home.
Yeah, I have heard that a lot about the they just bring back the indigenous knowledge, and depending on the right combination of plants, you find the right partners. They can work together to survive, like for example, winters, and like what we were talking about the frost, and understanding which combination of plants actually work for that specific environment where they are, instead of comparing what they have somewhere in other ecosystems. So, can you maybe give us a real life example from your work at Hofverde, like a combination of plants that you see that they coexist particularly well together? And have you seen Do they compete for resources, or this is completely a misconception?
We have so many examples. So I invite everyone to come and look because it's really beautiful to walk through the syntropic system and experience it firsthand. But I'm trying to give us a few little examples. So I think one example that many people are used to is the milpa. So it's an example of only placenta species, so only species that are annual plants. So we have the corn as an emergent plant that loves full light, and then we have the beans that are climbing on the corn, who appreciate some shade as they are climbers. We know from their ecophysiological characteristic that they appreciate some shade. And then we have the pumpkin or the squash that is like creeping on the floor, really appreciating the sun protection. Because as we know, when we see the pumpkin exposed to a lot of light, it's really shrinkling up the leaves, right? So it's more happy in more shady places, let's say. And so we know that these three plants work very well together in a way that if they were in a monoculture, we would have even less space. So let's say if we combine the three of them, we can occupy more space. Thinking from the soil perspective, we have more soil feeding through the roots than if we had a monoculture. And so we can really have the plants close together. Everyone is fulfilling their own function. There's no function overlap, let's say, and they can be very well together because they all like support each other in that sense. And this was now just looking at the light perspective, like the light topic. And now when we have these three sisters, and these are just the annual plants, and now if we add plants of many other life cycles, so not just annual, but plants who like biannual plants, plants who have a life cycle of, I don't know, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20, 30, and so on, you know. And if we combine all of this with different niches, different functions, then we can create a system where really everyone is helping each other. And because of this, the network is way stronger and resilient than they were by themselves or in a monoculture. So maybe to give another example of more longer life cycle plants, we have one syntropic line, for example, where in the middle of the line we have vigorous rootstock pairs. So in the end can be pretty big pairs. In between those, we have service berries. So let's say pairs each 10 meter. Between them, one service berry, and then in between the pear and the service berry, we even have more black currants. So, and all the three of them, similar with the three sisters, are really, fitting with each other in the sense of, for example, their light needs. Like the pear really loves full sun, Juneberry appreciates some shade, and the black currant really appreciates quite some shade. So even like under the service berry, let's say. And this is our climax, let's say. So this is our fruit production that the system is set out for, can become many decades old. And in between these elements, we have additional what we call seed nests, where we introduce seeds of species that we find around that work really well with the conditions we have, that respond well to pruning, that grow very fast in the beginning. So mostly secondary species, many maples, ash, dogwood, can be many different species. And them we have in the system to make the party even louder, let's say. So to have more density, more diversity. We can also use them a bit like playing dough. So we prune them where we need shade. If we want to have more dynamic, we give another stimulation. Yeah, and regarding the competition question, I really have to say this is a very human-made concept. It's really depends on the glasses we wear. So if we wear the glasses of competition, we can see competition everywhere. But if we choose to wear the glasses of cooperation, we can see cooperation everywhere. And I think the cases where we experience what we think is competition, it's always a false design, I think. So in many cases, when humans made a design, so let's say humans designed monoculture, right? Or humans designed, weird plant combinations, let's say. And then we can see some problems, let's say optimizers coming or lack of water or something like this. And then we see it as competition, where actually it was a false design, because in nature, in the natural world, we don't see that happening, competition.
So, what we are hearing is that syntropic agriculture is really about rethinking how farms function, moving away from single crops towards diverse and dynamic systems that work more like ecosystems. It is also interesting to see how these ideas that originally developed in tropical regions are being adapted here in Europe, with all the challenges that come with different climates and different seasons. And your example in vErde brings really that to life and showing how different plants can actually support each other rather than compete. So let's take this one step further. Lily, when people hear the word farm, they usually think about rows of crops and then harvest. But at your farm in vErde, that feels like something much bigger. It's part of a laboratory, it's part classroom, it's part ecosystem. For those who haven't visited or haven't had a chance to look through the website yet, which I'm going to put in the description of the podcast, please, Lily, pull back the curtain to us and tell us what exactly is the mission behind vErde and why is it so important to have a living lab like this in Europe right now?
So, like I said in the beginning, I think that how it started and what is still our main motivating question is how can we produce food in a regenerative way? And this for us is always the main motivation, or where everything came from. So, on this farming aspect for us at vErde, really it's our mission to regenerate the soil, the land, and ourselves while doing it. Um, so we want to show that it really works to produce the food in a regenerative way while regenerating the land. And we want to do this in an economically viable way, while at the same time being true to ourselves and the healing process also on the human side. So for that second aspect, we have a nonprofit association that we founded on vErde. It's called vErde Regenerative. And we founded this with the mission for fostering the education in agroecology. So assist in this unlearning, let's say, and paradigm shift. It's about exchanging skills for a post-modernity world, for like how can we feed ourselves in a local regenerative way. And we are, integrating these two things. So one side, the education and the skilling, and on the other side, the actual farming, the techniques there. And then, of course, we are also embedded in the network and Terra Network and in other networks where we collaborate because I think no one can do this by themselves. It's like we need to do this as a movement. And yeah, I really like your question of like, why is it so important in Europe right now? Because, of course, this brings up many topics in my head of, like the political reality moving towards fascism and a very scarcity driven mindset. Like it's really feeding and fueling into this competition mindset, into this like resources are scarce. We need to protect ourselves, and it's a fight against each other. So I feel that these storylines are becoming louder and louder. So people really like, they go to work, they go back home to their nuclear family, they fence off, they try to like survival of the fittest mindset, all of these topics. And I feel especially with young people, like they're becoming very hopeless. Like there's so much climate anxiety and so I feel in this now I'm driving it very dark, but it's actually, I personally don't feel it so dark. But when we look outside, we can get this feeling, that it's very, it's very this dark horizon. But so in these times, I feel it's very important to create places where we are shaping these other realities. So where we don't just believe and hope that there is another future possible, but where we can actually show that there's other ways of being and there's other ways of living. And we believe that we need to live in a different way, like nuclear families. That doesn't make sense as a capitalist patriarchal model, We need to cooperate, live together, collaborate with non-human beings and the land. And yeah, so I think it's really important for all of us that we are here at vErde, that we create, that we can be like a standing proof that it is possible to live in a different way, even though there's many things that we fight against. First of all, bureaucracy and many of these things, but but it is possible and it's worth fighting for, I think.
The idea of a living lab is really interesting because, yeah, as you said, it suggests a space for learning and experimentation, and then and teaching new skills to people. And this brings me to another point. So people say that syntropic farming can be very knowledge intensive, in the sense that it requires the farmer to really observe and, as you have explained, and understand their systems. So Lily, how does that fit into a world where farming is becoming more and more automated and mechanized?
Yeah, it doesn't fit, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it doesn't really fit because the point is that how we are doing things, I believe, doesn't really fit. So, how we are doing things in farming is just, it's a constant fight, it's a constant struggle. Burnout is really high amongst farmers. Suicide, it has one of the highest suicidal rates compared to other professions. So, I think like working in farming, in conventional farming, which when I say conventional, I mean industrial farming, it's very, very hard, harsh, and it's a big fight. Fight in the sense that we are really fighting against something and not fighting for something. So I feel that more and more automated and mechanized farming is it's just driven by capitalism and by this domination, like this idea of dominating over nature. And I'm really not a person to blame the farmers because I think it's not, they definitely should not be the victims of this struggle, let's say. But I think really the system is to blame. And when I say the system is to blame, it's of course on all of us, right? Because every one of us is part of the system. So I think we all, like every single one, needs to change the system and also change the way of farming. And I think everyone can do this, even though people who are not farmers, we can create a different consumerism behavior. Actually, we can rethink what are we even consumers? Why are we consumers and not also producers? There's like even around us here on the countryside, there's so many gardens, backyard gardens that are just grass deserts, so only grass. And then also, of course, totally like changing the way how we integrate or see ourselves in the connection with food and with what we call nature, like this concept of something that's non-human. Um, yeah, and as you were asking about like if syntropic farming is very knowledge intensive and how is this opposed to how we are farming now, and I think yeah, actually, I get this a lot from people that they ask this in a very daunting way, in the sense of like, well, how can someone learn all of this? First of all, um, yeah, suggesting that farmers are stupid, where I'm like, farmers are not stupid. They can learn all of this, right? And then second of all, um, it's not like that's a bad thing, right? I mean, it's beautiful. Like every human being wants to learn. I mean, at least we are born this way, that we are curious, we want to learn. And then maybe through a modern day school system, this gets, stepped on a bit, but we are curious, we want to learn. And through learning, when we say learning, I don't mean sitting on a desk and studying, I mean being out there, observing, becoming intimate with the species that we want to farm, like really speaking their language, um, being able to read what they need, being able to read the macroorganism around it, like what does the change in insect population mean? How is the color of the grass changing, and all of this. So I think, yes, it's very knowledge intensive, but not necessarily in the way that we need to increase the studying time for it, or people have to sit behind desks for a long time. Actually, I believe the opposite, we need to be out there, we need to be curious. We and I think also we want to be. It's just that, yeah, modernity makes it hard for us because we have all of these obligations and so on that, tie us to a desk. But that's a whole other topic. Maybe I stop myself there.
yeah, I can see. I think for farmers, they already know their art, so it's just kind of adding more to what they know. It's like I feel like they know how to do conventional farming, but once you kind of put a little bit of like, maybe they're having some problem with some pests, let's say, and then you introduce something to them, like, okay, what if you plant this row of other plants? I don't feel like it becomes like something that is daunting to learn, but they go like, oh, like, wow, like mind blowing, I just had to plant this other thing. And then they kind of start associating also the knowledge that they have of different plants, and then try to kind of bring themselves to learn more. This like, I also don't see it as like as a bad thing, but like I feel like it would come organically to them, the learning,
Yeah.
not like they have to see it and kind of write in a notebook. I don't think it will be too daunting for them. You see, now I was super entertained looking through the vErde website and all the different resources that you have there, and I came across a very intriguing phrase that got stuck in my head. And the phrase said, water must be planted, which sounds simple, but it also sounds very powerful. So, what does it mean for you, Lily, and why is it so important?
Yeah, it's a nice phrase. We didn't up with it all by ourselves, I have to say. So originally, it's a phrase, or it's inspired by Ernst Goetsche's saying. He said "agua se planta," so which we can translate to either like water is planted, or plants itself, or can be planted. So um, yeah, and we made it into water must be planted. So there's like, yeah, two things I want to say with this. So first of all, why did Ernst say it, or why are we also using it? It is because it's referring to the water cycle. So it's referring to the fact that a big portion of the land rain that we have here, for example, in continental Europe, or like here in Germany, comes actually from the land vegetation. I believe here it's something like 40 to 60% land versus from the ocean. And so if we really, yeah, take that in, it really means that through our deforestation, we are creating our own droughts, right? So because we are taking down the trees and we are taking out all this transevaporation, um, we are, yeah, taking out the water. And especially as farmers, but also when I talk to people around who just have small garden, everyone's experiencing that year by year we're having less rain. Except for then these intense rains where we have, like floods happening. But yeah, so this is, I think, really important to bring back to people's minds that trees equal water. And yeah, there's beautiful documentaries also on this, with like the flying rivers in the Amazon, where all the evaporation really creates rivers in the sky. So it's very powerful what we can, not we, but what nature has installed there, so that trees create water. Um, and I believe that, especially here, but I believe it's also in many other places, people really love to complain, right? So they're like, oh, it's not raining. This is annoying. La, la, la. Like, we love to complain all day long. But then the next step of like really thinking, okay, why is that? And what can we do against it or for it? This is another hard step. And so this is why we have changed the phrase a bit to water must be planted, in the sense of like, we can't just sit back and wait for it, because we don't have that time. I mean, planet Earth is fine. She will survive. But if us humans, are we going to survive? This is more the question, right? And so we need to do something. We can't just like sit on our asses, excuse my word choice, and yeah, just like wait and be like, okay, it's gonna be great. No, we need to do something. And so yeah, at Hope Verde, we also have another phrase that people, it's hard for them to understand. We say, don't know, do care, which also goes against like a bit of this, like, I don't give a fuck culture of like, I don't know, I don't care, whatever, And we're like, no, we don't know, maybe, in the sense of like, we don't always have the best solution for everything. And we don't know how to solve every world's problem. But we do care, and we need to do something, because if we care, we need to, yeah, become active and do something. And so yeah, so because we care, we think that yeah, it's better to just do anything, something, and not being part of this hamster wheel. So yeah, therefore it's a bit of our political activism to say water must be planted, I guess.
Great. That's a fascinating shift in perspective. to stop thinking that water is something that we just pour on something, and start seeing it as something that we can actually build and retain into our landscape with our own hands. It sounds very hopeful, if I'm honest. A very important question that many people may have in mind right now is that, is syntropic agriculture scalable? And I mean, can we feed a city using syntropic agriculture, or this is destined to stay as a practice for people with small plots of land? So in your mind, how do you think it will be ideal to scale this up?
This is a very big question. We get asked this a lot. And I personally, yeah, I like to answer with absolutely yes. Like, of course, it's scalable. But the question is, what is scaling? How do we define scaling? And I believe it's absolutely scalable, and we should scale it up, but doing it by growing farmers first. So, yeah, we cannot expect one farmer to work hundreds of hectares in a syntropic way, because this would be, again, thinking like, I am human, I am this dominator of my land, and not really collaborating. Because a farmer that works with hundreds of hectares, how can he or she really know their land, like really know their plants, be like intimate with all of them? This is not possible. So because of this, then it's also not possible to really apply the principles in the sense of to really collaborate with everyone. Then yeah, there it just works to do monoculture, works mechanized, works, yeah, like that. This is my personal stand. I know that there's also people saying otherwise, but I believe we need to scale up by growing farmers. I believe we need to have big cooperative farms so we can have, yeah, many, many farmers for many dozens or hundreds of hectares who either work all in similar areas or who also have different specialties. And, so we can have a super diverse, it can be like the big area can be huge, but it's very small fractioned, let's say. And yeah, and also the farms need to be it needs to be needs to be reshaped. So we cannot think of food being produced as commodities in this concept, in this cooperative farm, but we need to work with CSAs, so community supported agriculture, and in a very, yeah, that it offers just a big variety, that we can be self-sufficient throughout most of the year, that we can also produce, for example, herbal medicine or beauty products, let's say, or so that we can really yeah, become regionally self-sufficient. And even thinking bigger in the sense that farms are not just places of food production, but also integrating education, integrating multi-generational, not just households, but being, and communities, also integrating care, like care work. So all of this, yeah, I think this is how we scale up, by really cooperating in all of the senses. Um, and no, like me before everyone else, no hyper individualism, but like we need to grow together. And it's a hard path, I have to say, like for everyone in our community, the same. Like we constantly need to remind ourselves what we were brought up with, a different mindset, and we need to restructure that mindset before, and otherwise we cannot build that up, let's
Yeah.
say. So yeah, I think how we scale up is really through cooperation.
Yeah.
It's really through, yeah, through cooperation also, and foremost, I think, on the human level. Because, yeah, even in alternative farming communities, I think it's there, it's everywhere. Competition is in our minds, we need to
Yeah.
work hard on letting it go.
And finally, what is the one myth or misconception about syntropic agriculture that you would like to clear out?
There's many, but I'm gonna come down to just to one. I think the number one thing that I really that gets on my nerve, let's say, is that people say syntropic farming is not financially viable. And this to me is a big, big misconception. Because yeah, of course it's deeper than just saying, yeah, it's viable. Because yeah, it's of course So when we say financially viable, what I mean with this is that it's something that is not just for the hippy dippy elite, what some people say, or like for people with small house gardens. Sometimes I also get this prejudice, let's say, that people say, it's just like this cute handwork, like manual labor. This is like not really the real deal, you know? Like I get these kinds of comments a lot. And I think this is again another tool of trying to belittling and making it small with this in this mindset that this is like playground, let's say, and it's not for the real people, you know. It's again this capitalistic patriarchal world, I feel, that wants to yeah, just brush it away because it's endangering the system. And I think if we approach syntropic farming in the true agroecological way, so not just in the way that we apply one principle or something like that, but in the way that we really reshape the way how we farm in a paradigm shift, we go away from individualism to cooperation and so on, then I think we can really transform the system. Of course, we need to still take into account that we need to farm in an efficient way. So as with every business or with everything you do, you need to do it efficiently. So you can't be like doing something and then like, okay, cool, I go on holiday for 4 weeks or something. That doesn't work, you know? You need to work it efficiently. So it's not a hobby garden. So this is the first thing. Then we need to approach it in a really, as I mentioned many times, like both vertical and horizontal cooperation. So we both need to cooperate with other farmers, like vertically, and also horizontally along the production chain, you know? So we need to cooperate with, I don't know, people where we get the seeds from if we don't source them ourselves, or where we sell to yeah. And also us as a farm, we have, taken on many corporations where, for example, we did it without money itself, but like in a gift economy kind of way, or where we cooperated in the sense that like we all fall or what's the saying, fall or die? No, run or yeah, whatever. Like we're in this together kind of mindset, you know? So I think this is necessary for it to become financially viable. And of course, entering this deep learning. So I think it's not possible to apply syntropic agriculture, even though some people, especially on Instagram, try to promote this with like, you can just buy my design and then you can do syntropic farming, or you could just enter this workshop and then I tell you how to do everything and then you do it. You know, this is not possible. Then we are again at the same thing that people tried to do before, you know, but we really need to change how we go about it. And every one of us who is in this movement, both in the more theoretical thinking side or also on the field with the hands in the soil, we really need to enter this path of deep learning and unlearning. Um, yeah. And then just like to finish off, I think I want to mention just again, because it's very important to me, that we need to redesign the way how we do food, let's say. So in the way of like how we see food, how we value it, how we see it as a commodity, that it's not a commodity anymore, but actually like a means to life. And how we value like ecosystem services, that we don't just see it as something that, okay, we do it for my green conscience, but that it's actually see the value and feel the value, you know? And yeah, and just like I said, like re-indigenize ourselves into the land. So yeah, I think this is really a path where we can make it financially not just financially viable, but this is like this one argument that people always say against, you know, where I feel again this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's well said. I think, yeah, it requires a systemic change.
Yeah, exactly.
Deep,
Yeah.
deep. Okay, so as we head toward the end of our time today, what stands out from our conversation is that syntropic agriculture is not just about producing food, but also about regenerating the systems that support it. It is a reminder that farming can work with nature and not against it, and even small changes in how we think about agriculture can have a big impact over time. And Lily, what you do in vErde really proves that we don't have to choose between a healthy planet and a full plate. We can have both if we are willing to look at the land and the production systems in a different way. So everyone, if you want to see these living labs in action, please check out the links to vErde in the show notes. And Lily, would you like to add any last words today?
I just want to say thank you so much for your work and your contribution in spreading our messages. And yeah, I love the cause and how we are going together.
Yeah, let's make it count. Thank you, Lily.
Yes.
Thanks for being here with me today. That was it for today. This was again another fantastic and very informative session. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you, Lily, for sharing your vision with us. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Remember to tune in to listen more episodes of our Agroecology Bites podcast. The links are on the show notes as well. And thank you, everyone. And I will see you in the next opportunity. Goodbye.